My husband pulled his mistress onto the stage in front of the whole company and announced my suspension until I apologized to her. As the room erupted in laughter, I simply replied, "Okay." He had no idea that while he was flaunting her on social media, I had legally secured ownership of his company's entire security mainframe. The next morning, when 800 employees were locked out, I walked in and handed him a divorce summons with his court date. My name is Peyton Sutton. I am 36 years old, and I am the lead system architect of Aegis Wave Dynamics. I wrote the code that secures the servers humming in the basement. I designed the encryption protocols that our clients trust with their billions. I am also the co-founder of this company, a detail that seemed to have been erased from the corporate history books this morning. I sat in row 12, seat C, of the Grand Atrium in our Chicago headquarters. The air was freezing, a signature of the overactive HVAC system I had complained about for 3 years. But today the chill felt personal. Around me, the room was vibrating with the bass of an electronic dance track that cost more to license than we used to spend on food in a month. The stage was awash in blue and silver light, the company colors, blasting from a massive LED wall that rose 20 feet high. It did not look like a quarterly all-hands meeting. It looked like a reality television finale. And in a way, I supposed it was. Colton Sutton, my husband and our CEO, strode onto the stage. The applause was polite but hesitant. He was not alone. Hooked onto his arm, beaming like she had just won a pageant, was Sloane Hart. They walked in perfect synchronization. A power couple manufactured for Instagram feeds and Forbes covers. Colton wore a bespoke navy suit that fit him perfectly, a sharp contrast to the hoodies he wore when we were eating ramen in Milwaukee. Sloane was in a cream-colored sheath dress that screamed executive elegance, though her eyes were scanning the crowd with a predatory hunger. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My knuckles were white. "Did you see that?" A whisper drifted from the row behind me. It was one of the junior marketing analysts. Why is the legal wife sitting in general admission while Sloane is up there holding his hand? "Shh," another voice hissed back. "Read the room. Sloane is the new queen bee. Don't let them see you looking at Peyton." I fixed my gaze on the stage, refusing to turn around. I could feel the eyes of 300 employees boring into the back of my neck. They were waiting for a reaction, a tear, a storm out, anything to spice up their Tuesday morning. I would give them nothing. Colton reached the podium and waited for the music to fade. He smiled, that charismatic, 1,000-watt smile that had charmed venture capitalists and, once upon a time, me. "Team," Colton began, his voice booming through the surround sound system. "We are entering a new era, an era of bold visibility, an era where we don't just protect data, we project power." He turned to Sloane, gesturing to her with an open palm. "And leading this charge is a woman who has redefined what this company looks like to the world. Please join me in officially welcoming Sloane Hart as our permanent Chief Brand and Vision Officer." The applause was scattered. The engineering team, my team, sat with their arms crossed. They knew Sloane. They knew she treated technical specifications like suggestions and engineers like janitors. But the sales and marketing departments cheered loudly, likely terrified of being on the wrong side of the new regime. "Sloane is the new heart of Aegis Wave," Colton declared, placing a hand on her shoulder, a possessive, intimate touch that had no place in a boardroom. "She brings a warmth and a fire that we have been missing." Sloane stepped up to the microphone, tossing her hair back. "Thank you, Colton. And thank you all. I know change is hard, especially for the older guard." She paused, her eyes flickering briefly toward where I sat. "But we are going to do amazing things." I remained a statue. I focused on my breathing, in, out, count to 4. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The blue lights on the stage turned a harsh, stark white. Colton stepped back to the mic, his face dropping its jovial mask. He looked solemn, pained, even. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "However," Colton said, his voice dropping an octave to signal seriousness, "growth requires a healthy culture, and lately, That culture has been under attack. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the servers' floors below. We have a zero-tolerance policy for toxicity at Aegis Wave, Colton continued, pacing the stage. We cannot function when senior leadership undermines the vision. We cannot function when jealousy is disguised as technical concern. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I knew what was coming. I had seen the emails he ignored. I had felt the cold shoulder at home, but I never thought he would do it here, not in front of everyone. Peyton, he said. He didn't say Peyton Sutton. He didn't say our chief architect, just Peyton, like I was a naughty child. He pointed a finger directly at me. 300 heads swiveled in my direction. The internal camera operator, caught up in the drama, panned the lens toward me. My face appeared on the 20-foot LED screen, magnified and exposed. I saw myself pale, stoic, unblinking. You have consistently tried to undermine Sloane's authority, Colton said, his voice echoing. You have spread rumors. You have created division in our teams because you cannot separate your personal feelings from professional conduct. You have smeared a female colleague's reputation. Sloane was sitting on a stool in the background now. She crossed her legs and looked down at her hands, shaking her head slightly. She looked devastated. It was perfect. If I didn't know her, if I didn't know she had spent the last 6 months gaslighting me and stealing my work, I might have believed her. But I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. She was enjoying this. She was feeding on my humiliation. Effective immediately, Colton announced, staring me down from his elevated platform. You are suspended without pay. Gasps rippled through the room. A chair squeaked loudly as someone shifted in discomfort. This suspension will remain in effect, Colton added, delivering the final blow. Until you come up to this stage and offer a sincere, public apology to the woman I love and respect, to Sloane. The phrase, the woman I love, hung in the air like toxic smoke. He had said it. He had admitted it to the entire company, to the board members watching on Zoom, to the world. He wasn't just firing his co-founder, he was discarding his wife. My face felt hot, a burning sensation that started at my neck and flooded my cheeks. The humiliation was physical, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to scream back, to shout about the nights I slept under my desk coding the kernel while he was out networking, to scream about the Series A pitch deck I wrote while he practiced his golf swing. But I looked at the screen. I saw my own eyes. They were hard. They were cold. They didn't know. They didn't know that 3 hours ago, the transfer of intellectual property rights had been finalized. They didn't know that the Helix Shield protocol, the very backbone of Aegis Wave's security, no longer belonged to Aegis Wave. I slowly uncrossed my legs. I grabbed the strap of my leather tote bag. I stood up. The room held its breath. The silence was absolute. Colton stood on the edge of the stage, his chin raised, waiting for my breakdown. He wanted tears. He wanted a scene that would prove I was the crazy ex he needed to paint me as. Sloane looked up, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I looked up at the man I had married 10 years ago, the man who was currently destroying everything we built for a woman who couldn't code Hello World in Python. I locked eyes with him. I kept my voice steady, loud enough to be heard without a microphone. Okay, that was it. Just one word. Colton blinked, his brow furrowed. The audience looked confused. They wanted a fight. They wanted drama. Okay, was not in the script. I turned my back on the stage. I didn't look at the confused faces of my engineering team. I didn't look at the smirking marketing interns. I walked toward the double doors at the back of the atrium. As I walked, the camera, still projecting to the giant screen, tracked my movement. It zoomed in slightly on my bag as I swung it over my shoulder. Sticking out of the side pocket was the corner of a thick white envelope. Most people probably assumed it was a severance package, or maybe technical schematics I was stealing. They had no idea. It was not a retreat. It was a delivery mechanism, and the clock was already ticking. The heavy double doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the murmur of 300 confused employees and the electric hum of the stage lights. The hallway was silent, stretching out before me in a long corridor of glass and brushed steel. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floor, a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed like a metronome. With every step away from that auditorium, the adrenaline that had kept my spine straight began to cool, replaced by a ghost that had been haunting me for years. The ghost of who we used to be. My mind drifted back 5 years. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't a glass tower. It was Milwaukee. In a 400-square-foot studio apartment that smelled perpetually of stale pepperoni pizza and overheating electronics. I could still see it vividly. The winter wind would rattle the single-pane window frames, and we would bundle up in layers of thrift store sweaters because we were too terrified to turn up the thermostat. Our headquarters was a folding card table shoved against the drafty window. That was where Aegis Wave Dynamics was born. It didn't have a logo or a brand strategy then. It just had me, hunched over a laptop with a cracked screen, my eyes burning after 16 hours of staring at the command line. Colton would be pacing the small strip of floor behind me, dodging the labyrinth of extension cords that snaked across the cheap laminate. He would have his phone pressed to his ear, his voice pitching up an octave as he tried to sell a vision we hadn't even finished building yet. "It is a revolution in cybersecurity. Mark," he would say, pacing back and forth, waving his free hand as if Mark could see him. "We are not just patching holes. We are building a living digital immune system. It is going to be huge." He was the voice. I was the hands. While he spun dreams to his old business school buddies, I was the one building the engine to make those dreams fly. I wrote every single line of the original kernel for Helix Shield. I remember the night I finally cracked the polymorphic encryption algorithm. It was 3 a.m. I was shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I woke Colton up, tears in my eyes, pointing at the screen where the test sequence had finally returned a green success message. He had hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. "We did it, Peyton," he had whispered into my hair. "We are going to change everything. And when we do, your name is going to be right next to mine on every single slide. Partners, 50-50, always." We shared everything back then. We shared a Netflix password. We shared the anxiety of staring at a bank account balance that hovered dangerously close to single digits. We shared the dream of a house in the suburbs with a yard big enough for a dog. We were a single unit, fighting against the world. But success, I learned, is a powerful solvent. It dissolves bonds that poverty only tightened. The shift happened the moment the Series A funding hit our account. $10 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract, but its effects were immediate and concrete. We moved to Chicago, we hired staff, and suddenly, Colton wasn't just my husband and partner anymore. He was the CEO. I remember logging onto the new corporate website a week after the launch. I clicked on the About Us page, expecting to see our dual profiles side by side, just as he had promised. Instead, I saw a full-page professional headshot of Colton, looking visionary and commanding. Under his name, the text read, "Founder and the soul of Aegis Wave." I scrolled down, my stomach churning. I kept scrolling. Finally, at the bottom of the page, under a generic heading titled Key Technical Staff, I found my name, no photo, no bio, just Peyton Sutton, Architecture. When I confronted him about it that night, he had laughed it off, pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch. "Babe, you are overthinking it," he had said, loosening his tie. "Investors want a singular figurehead. It is just branding. It doesn't mean anything. You know who really runs the show." I let it go. I told myself that the code was what mattered. If the product worked, the credit would follow. I was naive. The erasure became systematic. The pivotal moment, the moment I truly realized I was being scrubbed from my own history, happened 2 years ago at the Global InfoSec Conference in Las Vegas. Colton was the keynote speaker. He stood on a stage not unlike the one he had just kicked me off of, bathed in spotlights, captivating an audience of 2,000 industry leaders. He spoke eloquently about the future of adaptive threat mirroring, using the very metaphors I had come up with over breakfast. Meanwhile, I was standing in the exhibition booth, 300 feet away, wearing a polo shirt with the company logo like a junior support tech. A potential client from a major bank was screaming at me because the demo unit had crashed. While Colton was accepting applause for the vision, I was frantically typing into a terminal, hot-fixing a memory leak live on the convention floor. A tech reporter from Wired magazine had wandered by the booth after the keynote. She looked at the complex code scrolling down my screen and then looked at me. "This architecture is incredible," she had said. "Genuinely impressed. It is so distinct. Who designed the core logic for Helix Shield?" Colton had walked up at that exact moment, fresh from the stage, glowing with adrenaline. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a restraint. "Our engineering team is truly world-class," Colton answered smoothly, flashing that winning smile at the reporter. "We hire the best talent to execute my vision." My vision. He didn't introduce me. He didn't say, "This is Peyton, my wife and the architect of this entire system." He reduced me to the team, an anonymous, faceless collective. I looked at him, waiting for him to correct it, waiting for him to give me even a crumb of acknowledgement. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy charming the reporter. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile I didn't feel. As long as the company survives, I had told myself. As long as we win, I snapped back to the present. The memories receded, leaving a cold, hard resolve in their wake. I was walking past the Wall of Honor in the main lobby now. It was a gallery of framed magazine covers and press clippings celebrating the rise of Aegis Wave. There was Colton on the cover of Forbes, Colton and Sloan on the cover of Inc., with the headline, "The Power Couple Redefining Security." They looked beautiful. They looked unstoppable. I stopped for a brief second at the very end of the hallway, near the entrance to the restrooms and the emergency exit. There, mounted in a dimly lit corner, was a small, brushed metal plaque listing the founding team. My name was there, third on the list, below Colton and the first investor. It was so small you would miss it if you weren't looking for it. I reached out and touched the cold metal of the plaque. "You wanted to erase me, Colton," I whispered to the empty corridor. "You wanted to make me a footnote in your great success story." I gripped the strap of my bag tighter, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. "But you forgot one thing," I thought, pushing open the glass doors to the outside world, where the Chicago winter air hit me like a slap. "You can paint over the history books all you want, but you can't erase the person who holds the keys to the castle." I hailed a cab, not to go home to cry, but to go to the one place Colton had forgotten existed, the place where the real history was kept, and where his future was about to be dismantled. Line by code. Sloan Hart did not just walk into a room, she curated her entrance. The first time I saw her was 6 months ago in the boardroom, during a quarterly strategy session that had been, up until that moment, remarkably dry. The heavy oak doors swung open, and in walked a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a high-end perfume commercial. She was wearing a tailored red suit that cost more than my first car, and she carried a portfolio like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Colton stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "Everyone," he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, performative register he used for investors. "I want you to meet the woman who is going to take Aegis Wave to the stratosphere. This is Sloan Hart, an old colleague of mine from New York." I narrowed my eyes. Colton had never mentioned an old colleague named Sloan from his time in New York. I watched the way her eyes locked onto his, a gaze that held a familiarity far deeper than professional acquaintanceship. It was a look that said they had shared secrets, and perhaps shared sheets. Evelyn Rhodes, the head of the venture capital firm that held 40% of our shares, leaned forward, tapping her gold pen against the mahogany table. "We have the tech, Colton," Evelyn said, her voice raspy from decades of smoking and shouting at CEOs. "But tech is boring. The market needs a story, a sexy brand story, and I hear Ms. Hart is a wizard. Please, call me Sloan, she said, sliding into the empty seat next to Colton, the seat usually reserved for the CFO. She didn't look at the financial reports. She didn't look at the technical roadmap. She looked directly at the board and smiled. We aren't selling security, Evelyn. We are selling invincibility, and invincibility needs a face. That was the beginning of the invasion. The first direct shot she took at me happened 2 days later during the all-staff introduction mixer. I was standing near the coffee station, reviewing a server load report on my tablet, trying to ignore the forced socialization. Sloan drifted over, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, surrounded by a gaggle of junior sales reps who were already enamored with her New York energy. She stopped in front of me. The chatter died down. You must be Peyton, she said. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were cold, calculating scanners assessing a threat. I am, I said, extending a hand. I am the chief security architect. I built the... She didn't let me finish. She took my hand in a limp, dismissive shake and laughed a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, you are Colton's wife. That is amazing. It is so great to finally meet the woman who keeps our CEO fed and happy at home. It must be so nice to just support his dream like that. The silence that followed was deafening. The sales reps shifted awkwardly. They knew I had written the core code. They knew I managed the entire engineering division, but Sloan had just verbally demoted me from co-founder to housewife in under 10 seconds. I co-founded this company, I said, my voice tight. Of course you did. Sweetie, she said, patting my arm patronizingly before turning her back to me to address the group. Now, who wants to hear about the new logo concepts? From that day on, my workspace became a battlefield. Sloan started inserting herself into high-level technical meetings, armed with zero technical knowledge, but an arsenal of buzzwords. We would be deep in a discussion about cryptographic latency or packet loss, and Sloan would breeze in, smelling of vanilla and arrogance. This is all very dense, she would interrupt, waving a manicured hand at a whiteboard covered in complex algorithms. We need bold energy here. Can we make the encryption feel more aggressive? Can we make the user interface pop on TikTok? Encryption operates in the back end. Sloan, I tried to explain during one particularly painful meeting. Users don't see it. It is math. Math doesn't pop, she sighed, looking at Colton with a theatrical expression of exhaustion. See, Colton. This is the resistance I'm talking about. We are trying to disrupt the industry, and Peyton is worried about math. We need visionaries, not calculators. And Colton, my husband, the man who used to stay up all night with me debugging kernel panics, nodded solemnly. She has a point. Peyton, don't be a blocker. Think bigger. The theft of my work began slowly, then happened all at once. I had been developing a new protocol called adaptive threat mirroring. It was a sophisticated system that used AI to mimic hacker behavior and bait them into isolated sandboxes. It was brilliant, complex, and entirely my design. I had written the white paper for it 3 months prior. Then came the investor pitch for Series B funding. I sat in the back of the room, ready to answer technical questions, but I never got the chance. Sloan took the stage, clicking a remote. A slide appeared on the screen with flashy, neon graphics and the title, Mirage Defense. Imagine a shield that lies to you, Sloan purred to the investors. I call this my baby, Mirage Defense. It reflects the attacker's ego back at them. My jaw dropped. She was describing my protocol. She used my metaphors. She even used a simplified version of my diagrams. But she had recolored them pink and black. She was pitching my life's work as her spiritual brainchild. I looked at Colton. He was beaming at her, looking at her with a mix of pride and lust that made my stomach turn. When the investors applauded, asking how she came up with such a revolutionary concept, Sloan placed a hand over her heart. It just came to me in a dream. I realized we needed to be as deceptive as the enemy. She didn't know a line of code from a grocery list, yet she was being hailed as a tech genius. The erasure moved from the boardroom to the public eye. Colton and Sloan became the face of Aegis Wave. They were everywhere. Photos of them at charity galas appeared in Vanity Fair. They launched a podcast called The Visionary and the Voice, where they discussed keeping the passion alive in business. They joked. They finished each other's sentences. They acted like a married couple in everything but the legal paperwork. Meanwhile, I was erased. When they were at the Met Gala, I was in the server room at 2 a.m, manually migrating a database because Sloan had demanded we launch a new website before the infrastructure was ready. I was the mechanic in the grease pit, keeping the engine running so they could drive the Ferrari around town and wave at the cameras. But the moment that truly solidified my resolve, the moment that turned my sadness into cold, hard calculation, happened on a Tuesday night. I was working late. As usual, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a Slack notification from the general all-hands channel. It was a preview of the new nationwide marketing campaign Sloan was about to launch. The header read, "Meet the woman behind our vision." I clicked the link, my hand trembling slightly. The image was a high-resolution, black-and-white portrait of Sloan. She looked serious, intellectual, wearing oversized glasses she didn't actually need, staring at a wall of code that I had written. The tagline below her face read, "From personal brokenness to brand warrior. How Sloan Hart rebuilt herself and built the most secure network in America." I read the copy. It was a complete fabrication. It claimed Sloan had been there from the beginning. It claimed she was the one who pushed for the pivot to cybersecurity. It described her late nights coding alongside the CEO. It stole my history. It stole my struggle. It stole my identity. And below the post, Colton had reacted with a fire emoji and the comment, "To the real architect of our success." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. The hum of the servers around me seemed to fade away, replaced by a ringing silence in my ears. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I simply took a screenshot. Then I opened a secure folder on my encrypted drive. I dragged the screenshot into a folder named Evidence. "You want to be the architect, Sloan," I whispered to the empty office, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. "Fine. Let's see if you know how to hold the roof up when I pull out the foundation." The disaster began, as most corporate catastrophes do. With a slide deck and a glass of champagne, Sloan had decided that our new biometric authentication module was ready for the world. She branded it Face First Security and sold an exclusive launch partnership to one of the largest regional banks in the Midwest. The campaign slogan was plastered on every screen in the conference room: "We trust your face more than your password." I sat at the mahogany table, my hands trembling not from nerves, but from suppressed rage. "We cannot launch on Friday," I said, keeping my voice level. "The biometric hashing algorithm hasn't passed stress testing at scale. If we hit more than 10,000 concurrent requests, the latency spikes, and there is a vulnerability in the reset token generation. If a user fails recognition 3 times, the fallback protocol is unencrypted for 12 milliseconds. A botnet could drive a truck through that window." Sloan rolled her eyes, dramatically dropping her stylus onto the table. "Here we go again," she sighed, looking at Colton. "The Department of No... I am the Department of Reality." "Sloan," I snapped. "This isn't a lipstick launch. This is people's bank accounts. If we expose their data, we are liable." Colton didn't even look at the technical risk assessment I had printed out for him. He was looking at the revenue projections Sloan had prepared. "Peyton, you are always so pessimistic," Colton said, waving his hand dismissively. "You treat every bug like it is the apocalypse. We need to accept some risk to capture the market. Sloan has the bank ready to sign. We are not delaying." "It is not a bug, Colton. It is a back door," I insisted. "Launch it," he ordered. The campaign went live at 8 a.m. on a Friday. By noon, the request volume had tripled our estimates. Sloan was popping corks in the marketing wing. Celebrating the viral adoption, I was glued to my dashboard in the engineering pit. The graph was climbing vertically, a hockey stick curve that investors love and engineers fear. At 4 in the afternoon, The red flags started. It began with a subtle anomaly in the server logs, a cluster of login attempts from IP addresses in Eastern Europe, all targeting the specific millisecond window I had warned them about. The system was struggling under the load, lagging just enough to widen that 12-millisecond gap into a gaping hole. My screen turned a wash of crimson alerts. Alert authentication, bypass detected. Alert elevated privileges, granted to unknown user. "They are in," I whispered. I picked up the phone to call Colton, but it went straight to voicemail. He was likely at an early celebratory dinner with Sloan. I tried the CTO line, no answer. Then, my personal cell phone buzzed. It was 1 a.m. I was still at home, monitoring remotely, paralyzed by the unfolding train wreck. The caller ID said Malik Rivera, our CFO. Malik was a quiet man, a numbers guy who usually kept his head down to avoid the crossfire between Colton and me. "Peyton," he whispered, sounding terrified. "Are you seeing the traffic?" "I am seeing a breach. Malik, I tried to warn them." "Listen to me," Malik said, his voice shaking. "I just left the office. I heard Sloan on the phone with the data team. She told them to overwrite the failure logs. She wants to present clean numbers to the board on Monday to trigger her performance bonus. And she told Colton that if the system crashes, they are going to issue a statement blaming it on legacy architecture designed by the chief architect. Me. They were going to frame me for the very disaster I tried to prevent. I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A cold, mechanical clarity washed over me. I grabbed my keys and drove into the Chicago night. A blizzard had set in, coating the city in a thick, suffocating layer of white. The roads were empty. My tires crunched over the ice as I sped toward the Aegis Wave Tower. The building was a ghost town. The security guard, half asleep, waved me through. I bypassed the executive suites on the top floor and went straight to the basement, the server farm. It was freezing down there. The cooling fans roared like jet engines, a deafening white noise that drowned out the world. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The blinking LEDs from the server racks provided enough illumination, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, plugging my laptop directly into the admin console. My breath formed clouds in the frigid air. I had to be surgical. If I simply shut down the module, the bank would sue us for breach of contract. I had to fix the plane while it was in a nosedive. I began to type, sudo access root, initiate reroute sequence. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound merging with the roar of the fans. I wrote a script to build a digital fence around the compromised module. I couldn't patch the vulnerability in real time without rebooting, so I did the next best thing. I created a sandbox. Every time the hackers tried to exploit the reset token, my script identified the signature and silently redirected their traffic into a dummy database, a hollow shell that looked like the bank's system but contained zero real data. I watched the logs. The attackers thought they were stealing millions. In reality, they were stealing empty bits of code. For 6 hours, I fought them. It was a silent war, fought in lines of text and packet headers. My fingers grew numb. My eyes burned. But slowly, the red alerts began to fade. The system stabilized. The customer data remained untouched. By 6 a.m, the threat was neutralized. The bank's customers were safe. Aegis Wave was safe. I slumped against the cold metal of the server rack, exhausted. I had saved the company. I had saved Colton's reputation. I had saved Sloan's ridiculous campaign. I packed up my laptop and drove home just as the sun was breaking over the frozen lake. At 9 a.m, an email notification pinged on my phone. It was a company-wide blast from Colton, copied to the entire board of directors. Subject, a triumph for Mirage Defense. Team. I am thrilled to report that our launch with the bank was a resounding success. Despite unprecedented traffic that would have crushed lesser systems, our new vision held strong. This is a testament to the bold leadership of Sloan Hart and the resilience of the Mirage Defense brand. We experienced zero downtime and zero customer friction. Onward. Colton. I stared at the screen. There was no mention of the breach, no mention of the frantic overnight patch, no mention of Peyton Sutton. He had erased the fire, and by extension, he had erased the firefighter. I sat at my kitchen counter, a cold cup of coffee in my hand. Most people would have been furious, but I felt something shift inside me, the final click of a lock falling into place. I opened my laptop again. I still had the admin tunnel open. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't delete the code. Instead, I initiated a download. I pulled everything. I downloaded the raw server logs showing the exact timestamp of the breach. I downloaded the chat logs where I explicitly warned about the vulnerability. I downloaded the email chain where Colton dismissed the risk assessment. I downloaded the time-stamped commands showing my remote login at 2 a.m. and the code I wrote to save them. And then, thanks to the access Malik had inadvertently hinted at, I found something even better. I found the Slack messages between Sloan and the data team. Sloan, make the graph look green. I don't care if the latency is high. Just smooth out the curve before the board meeting. If anyone asks, blame the old legacy stack. I saved it all. Gigabytes of damning evidence. I transferred the files to an encrypted, offshore cloud server that no one at Aegis Wave knew existed. I named the folder The Insurance Policy. They wanted to pretend I didn't exist. They wanted to pretend my work was theirs. Fine. I closed the laptop with a soft snap. I would let them have their victory lap. I would let Sloan accept her bonus. I would let Colton think he was invincible. Because when you hold the black box from the crash site, you don't need to shout. You just need to wait for the investigation. And the investigation was coming. I would make sure of it. The uncomfortable peace following the bank incident lasted exactly 1 week. It shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in the Executive Briefing Center, a room walled with soundproof glass and filled with the scent of expensive leather and stale corporate ambition. We were hosting the procurement team from Titan Global, a defense contractor looking to overhaul their entire internal network. This was the biggest contract in our pipeline, worth nearly $50 million over 5 years. Sloan stood at the head of the table, pacing back and forth in front of the projection screen. She was in her element, weaving a narrative that was light on technical specs and heavy on buzzwords. She paused for effect, resting her hand on the screen where the Mirage Defense logo was glowing. "When I conceived this architecture," Sloan said, her voice dropping to a hush, "I knew I was taking a risk. I spent the last year nurturing this idea, treating it like my own child, because I knew the industry needed a heart transplant. Mirage Defense is that heart. It is the culmination of my personal vision for a safer world." The 3 executives from Titan nodded slowly, captivated by the performance. Colton sat to her right, looking at her with the adoration of a disciple. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, like a breaking branch. It was quiet, like a wire finally pulling taut and humming with tension. I had saved the company in the dark. I had let them take the credit for the bank rescue, but listening to her claim, she conceived the code I wrote while she was still working at a fashion magazine in Manhattan. That was a bridge too far. I leaned forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound angry. I sounded like I was correcting a typo in a spreadsheet. "That is a fascinating timeline. Sloan," I said. The room went dead silent. The Titan executives turned their heads toward me. Colton stiffened, his eyes widening in warning. "Excuse me?" Sloan asked, her smile freezing into a rictus of confusion. "You mentioned you spent the last year nurturing this idea," I continued, looking directly at the lead client. "But the actual architectural core of Mirage Defense, specifically the Adaptive Threat Mirroring Protocol, was written and committed to our repository 3 years ago, by me. All the documentation and commit logs are time-stamped. I am just glad to see the work I did back then is finally being brought to light with such enthusiasm." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The lead executive from Titan looked from me to Sloan, then to Colton. He cleared his throat awkwardly. 3 years, that implies a significant maturity in the code base. That is reassuring. Sloan recovered, but it was clumsy. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Well," she laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. We are all one big team here. Ideas flow. They evolve. It is a collaborative womb. Of course, I said, leaning back. Collaboration is key. Colton looked at me. If looks could fire employees, I would have been escorted out by security right then. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. 10 minutes later, the clients were ushered out by a flustered sales VP. Before the elevator doors even closed, Colton grabbed my arm hard and dragged me into his private office, slamming the door so violently the glass walls rattled. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, abandoning all pretense of professional decorum. "It was the truth," I said, pulling my arm from his grip and rubbing the spot where his fingers had dug in. She was lying to a defense contractor. Colton, due diligence would have exposed that timeline in 5 minutes. I saved you from a fraud lawsuit. You humiliated her, Colton roared, pacing around his desk. You deliberately tried to make her look incompetent in front of a $50 million client. You are petty. Peyton, you are vindictive. I am the chief architect, I countered, my voice steady. My job is accuracy. Her job seems to be taking credit for my intellectual property. This isn't about property, he yelled, spinning around to face me. This is about your jealousy. You can't stand that she shines. You can't stand that she has the charisma you never had. You are trying to destroy her because you are insecure. I am not insecure. Colton, I am tired. I am tired of watching you let a marketing consultant play engineer with the company we built. She is not just a consultant, Colton snapped. She is the future of this company, and she is the woman I love. The words hung in the air between us, vibrating like a struck gong. He stopped, realizing what he had said. He didn't retract it. He didn't stumble. He stood there, breathing heavily, and in his eyes, I saw no regret. I saw defiance. There it is, I said softly. He started, then stopped. He straightened his tie, his face hardening. I respect her. I care about her. And I won't let you bully her. Bully her. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Colton, you are sleeping with her. You are parading her around like a show pony while your wife cleans up the mess in the stables. And now you are telling me I am the bully for pointing out a calendar date. The door to the office opened. Sloane slipped in. She didn't knock. She walked right up to Colton, ignoring me completely, and placed a hand on his chest. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with unshed tears. Colton, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't feel safe. The way she looked at me in there, the aggression. It is a hostile work environment. I can't function like this. I can't lead if I'm constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for her to attack me. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was the victim, the fragile genius under siege by the bitter, old wife. Colton covered her hand with his own. He looked at me, and the man I had married, the man who had once promised we were partners against the world, vanished completely. In his place was a CEO protecting his asset, and a lover protecting his mistress. You are right, Sloane, Colton said, his voice turning cold and administrative. This has gone on too long. Peyton, you are clearly unable to separate your personal issues from your professional duties. You are toxic to this culture. Toxic, I repeated. I wrote the code that keeps the lights on. And that arrogance is exactly the problem, Colton said. I am going to make a statement, a loud one. We need to reset the culture of Aegis Wave, and that starts with you. What are you going to do? Colton, fire me, I asked. You know the bylaws. You need cause. Oh, I have cause, he sneered. Insubordination, harassment, sabotaging a client meeting. But I'm not going to fire you yet. I am going to make you an example. He walked to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Organize an all-hands meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, mandatory attendance. Prepare the main stage. He looked back at me. Get out of my office. Peyton, go home. And don't come back until the meeting tomorrow. You are going to apologize to Sloane in front of everyone, or you are going to be stripped of every ounce of authority you think you have." Sloane buried her face in Colton's shoulder, hiding a smirk that I knew was there. I walked out of the office. I didn't slam the door. I walked past the assistants who were pretending not to listen. I walked to the elevator. Colton thought he had won. He thought he had cornered me. He thought that by threatening me with public humiliation, he would force me into submission. He thought the threat of losing my job would make me beg. He had forgotten who handled the legal paperwork when we incorporated. He had forgotten who set up the intellectual property holding shell 3 years ago, when I first suspected he was losing his way. He wanted an apology. I would give him an answer. As the elevator descended, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation of tomorrow morning. I was thinking about the envelope sitting in my safe at home. I was thinking about the timestamps. I was thinking about the court date. Tomorrow. Colton wanted a show. I would give him a finale. Colton expected me to go home and weep into a pint of ice cream. He expected me to call my mother, sobbing about how my marriage was over. He expected the grieving wife. What he did not realize was that the wife had died 3 years ago, replaced by a silent partner who read the fine print. I drove past the turnoff for our sleek modern condo in downtown Chicago and kept going. I drove 40 minutes west, out to a nondescript industrial park near O'Hare Airport. I pulled into the lot of a beige, 2-story office building that housed a dental supply distributor and a tax preparation firm. I parked my Audi in the back, away from the streetlights. I took the stairs to the 3rd floor and unlocked Suite 304. It was a small room, barely larger than a closet, smelling of lemon cleaner and stale air. There was no decor, no plants, no photos. Just a single desk, a high-end server rack humming quietly in the corner, and a brass plaque on the wall that read, "Sutton Cryptologic Holdings LLC, to the world." Aegis Wave Dynamics was the titan of industry. But here, in this room, was the company that actually owned the titan's soul. 3 years ago, right after the Las Vegas conference where Colton had forgotten to introduce me, I had realized that love was not a sufficient business strategy. I had contacted Amara Blake, a shark of an intellectual property attorney at the firm Keen and Marrow. I told her I wanted to protect my work, not from competitors, but from my husband. Amara had drafted a masterstroke of corporate restructuring. At the time, we were moving our assets into a new holding structure to prepare for a potential IPO. I told Colton it was for tax efficiency. I told him it would protect our personal assets from corporate liability. He had nodded, barely looking up from his phone, and signed where I pointed. "You handle the boring legal stuff, babe," he had said, scrawling his signature on the tablet. "I trust you." He should have read Section 8, Paragraph C. I sat down at the desk and woke up the terminal. The screen glowed with the logo of Sutton Cryptologic. Here was the reality. Aegis Wave Dynamics did not own Helix Shield. They did not own the encryption protocols. They did not own the Mirage defense architecture. Sutton Cryptologic Holdings owned them. Aegis Wave was merely a licensee, paying a nominal fee of $1 a year for the right to use the technology. But the license had conditions. I pulled up the digital contract. The terms were clear. The license was valid in perpetuity, unless the primary inventor me was terminated without professional cause, suspended without due process, or subjected to public defamation by the licensee's executive leadership. In that event, the licensor reserved the right to terminate the agreement immediately. "You wanted to suspend me, Colton," I whispered, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You wanted to publicly humiliate me to prove your power. You just triggered the kill switch." I accessed the central signing server. This was the heartbeat of Aegis Wave. Every time a client system booted up, every time an employee swiped their badge, every time a database query was run, the software pinged this server to verify the license key. If the key was valid, the system worked. If the key was invalid, the system simply stopped. I didn't need to hack anything. I didn't need to destroy data. I just needed to decline the renewal. I typed in the command, "Set license status expired, effective time tomorrow, 12:01 a.m. I pressed enter. A small confirmation box popped up. Schedule confirmed. All 842 active enterprise licenses will be revoked in 6 hours and 14 minutes. At 1 minute past midnight, the security infrastructure for 3 major banks, a hospital network, and Aegis Wave's own headquarters would simply turn off. It wouldn't be a crash, it would be a lockout. And the only person on Earth who could generate a new key was sitting in this room, and she had just been suspended. I locked the office and drove back toward the city. I had one more stop to make. I met Amara at the Velvet Room, a dimly lit speakeasy in the West Loop where the music was low and the booths were high. She was waiting for me with a glass of Pinot Noir and a manila folder. Amara did not look like a lawyer who played nice. She wore sharp, angular glasses and a suit that looked like armor. She slid a drink toward me as I sat down. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice low. "It is set for midnight," I replied, taking a sip of the wine. "By breakfast, the company will be paralyzed." "Good," Amara said, "because I have been reviewing the files you sent me from the bank incident. The evidence on that USB drive is nuclear. Peyton." I reached into my bag and handed her the physical drive containing the logs, the Slack messages where Sloan ordered the data falsification, and the proof that Colton had knowingly signed off on a fraudulent report to the board. "This isn't just grounds for a lawsuit," Amara said, tapping the drive with a manicured fingernail. "This is securities fraud, falsifying performance data to a board of directors to trigger performance bonuses, misleading investors about a data breach. If we send this to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Colton and Sloan won't just be unemployed, they could be looking at prison time." "File it," I said without hesitation. "Submit the whistleblower complaint. I want it on the record that I reported this before the system goes down. I need to be the one who tried to save the ship, not the one who sank it." Amara nodded, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "I will have the courier run the package to the regulatory office first thing in the morning. By the time Colton realizes his keycard doesn't work, the federal investigators will already be opening a file." She opened her manila folder. Inside were the documents I had requested a week ago, just in case. "The divorce petition," Amara said, "and the summons." I looked at the papers. Peyton Sutton versus Colton Sutton, irreconcilable differences. "The asset division is already pre-calculated based on the post-nuptial agreement he signed when we formed Sutton Cryptologic," Amara explained. "You keep your intellectual property, he keeps the Aegis Wave brand, which, as of tomorrow morning, will be worth about as much as a used napkin." "I don't want to mail it to him," I said, staring at the legal text. "I want to hand it to him." "We can hire a process server," Amara suggested. "No," I said. "I want him to receive this at the exact moment he realizes he has lost everything. He called a board meeting for 9 o'clock tomorrow to humiliate me. He wants an apology. I'm going to give him a court date." Amara closed the folder and slid it across the table to me. "You know, Peyton," she said softly, "most clients in your position just want a settlement. They want the money. You are the first one who seems to understand that the real currency here is control." I took the folder and placed it in my bag, right next to the revocation codes for the software I had spent a decade building. "He told me I was nothing special," I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. "He told me I was just support staff. Tomorrow, I am going to show him that I am the only reason he was ever standing in the first place." I walked out of the bar and into the cold night. The snow was falling again. I checked my watch. 5 hours until midnight. I went home to our penthouse. I showered. I laid out my best black suit for the morning. I made myself a cup of tea, and then I slept like a baby, while the countdown clock in a dark office 10 miles away ticked toward 0. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:59 at night. The room was silent, save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of the man lying next to me. Colton was turned away, facing the edge of the mattress, but the pale blue glow illuminating the sheets told me he was awake. He was texting her, probably complaining about my outburst earlier, or perhaps finalizing their strategy for my public humiliation scheduled for 9 the next morning. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my hands folded over my chest. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I felt the way an astronaut must feel in the final seconds before liftoff, a suspended state of hyper-focused waiting. The numbers on the clock flickered. 1 minute past midnight. I closed my eyes and smiled into the darkness. 10 miles away, in a server farm buried beneath the city, a single line of code in the Sutton cryptologic master console executed. It didn't trigger an explosion. It didn't sound an alarm. It simply sent a silent, false signal to the heartbeat request of 842 active enterprise servers. Somewhere in the dark, a fan word, a status light blinked from green to amber, and then, the silence of the graveyard shift was broken. At the Aegis Wave Network Operations Center, the night was usually boring. 2 junior sysadmins, fueled by energy drinks and podcasts, sat watching the wall of monitors that tracked global traffic. At 12:05 in the morning, the first phone rang. "Oops, this is Dave," the admin said, spinning his chair. "Uh-huh. You can't log in. What is the error message?" He paused, frowning. "Pending authorization. That is weird. Have you tried a hard refresh?" A second phone rang, then a third. On the main dashboard, a map of the United States began to light up like a Christmas tree, but instead of the usual green activity nodes, the indicators were turning a dull, lifeless gray. "Dave," the other admin said, his voice rising in panic, "I just lost the dashboard for Titan Global. It says, license expired. I am trying to reboot the gateway, but it is refusing the admin credentials." "Try the backup root key," Dave ordered, typing frantically. I did. It is saying, "Contact vendor." "Dave, we are the vendor." By 12:30, the room sounded like a trading floor during a crash. The phones were screaming. The pagers on their belts were vibrating in unison. Every major client from the regional banks to the healthcare networks was dark. They hadn't been hacked. Their data was fine. They just couldn't open the door. And there was absolutely nothing the night crew could do to fix it. At 5:30 in the morning, my phone began to vibrate on the nightstand. It was a relentless, angry buzz that rattled against the wood. I reached over and calmly flipped the switch to silent. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Colton, who had finally fallen into a fitful sleep around 2. I put on my silk robe and walked to the kitchen. The penthouse was cold, the floor-to-ceiling windows radiating the chill of the Chicago winter. Outside, snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing the city in white. I took my time. I ground the coffee beans, savoring the rich, earthy aroma. I boiled the water to exactly 200 degrees. I poured it over the grounds in a slow concentric circle, watching the coffee bloom. The phone on the counter lit up again. Malik Rivera calling, then support desk calling, then Evelyn Rhodes calling. I ignored them all. I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug, walked to the window, and took a sip. It was perfect. Down below, the city was waking up, oblivious to the fact that its digital infrastructure had ceased to exist 5 hours ago. At 7 o'clock, the bedroom door flew open. Colton stumbled out, his hair messy, clutching his phone like it was a live grenade. He looked pale, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "Peyton," he croaked. He put the phone on speaker. "I don't care what the log says," the interim CTO was shouting on the other end, his voice tinny and distorted. "The system is locked. It is rejecting the master keys. Every time we try to override, it returns a prompt to contact the IP holder." "Who is the IP holder?" Colton yelled at the phone, looking at me. "We are the IP holder." "That is just it, Colton," the CTO stammered. "The logs are pointing to an external entity. It says, Contact Sutton Cryptologic Holdings, LLC. Who the hell is Sutton Cryptologic?" Colton froze. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. He looked at me. I was standing by the window, blowing gently on my coffee. I didn't say a word. I just raised an eyebrow. "Peyton," he whispered. "What is he talking about?" I took another sip. "You should probably call a lawyer." "Colton." "What did you do?" he demanded, taking a step toward me. "Do you remember the restructuring documents you signed 3 years ago?" I asked calmly. The ones you said were too boring to read, the ones that moved the IP into a separate holding company for tax efficiency. His face went slack. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking gray and old. He remembered. I could see the memory surfacing, him signing the tablet while watching a football game, laughing about how good I was at the details. You own the code, he stammered. Sutton Cryptologic owns the code, I corrected. Aegis Wave just rents it, and unfortunately, the license agreement has a strict clause regarding the public defamation of the inventor. When you suspended me yesterday, you violated the terms of service. Fix it, he hissed, panic turning into aggression. Turn it back on, now. I can't, I lied smoothly. The termination is automated. It requires a new contract to be negotiated, and I am afraid I have a very busy morning ahead of me. I walked past him into the bedroom to get dressed. He stood in the kitchen, paralyzed, listening to the CTO screaming on the speakerphone about lawsuits, threats coming in from 3 different time zones. 40 minutes later, I pulled my car up to the curb of the Aegis Wave headquarters. The scene was chaotic. The revolving doors were stationary. A crowd of 200 employees was huddled in the lobby and spilling out onto the snowy sidewalk. Idiot, I muttered to myself. I had forgotten to mention that the building's physical access control system, the badge readers that let employees into the elevators and offices, also ran on a localized version of Helix Shield. When the license expired, the doors locked. I watched as the receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, stood shivering by the turnstiles with a clipboard and a pen, manually checking names off a printed list, while a line of frustrated engineers and marketing associates stretched out the door. Is it a hack? I heard someone whisper as I approached. I heard it is the Russians. Another replied. Ransomware. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing a black wool coat over a sharp black suit, my hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. I didn't look like an employee coming to beg for her job back. I looked like an executioner arriving for work. I walked past the line. The employees parted for me, sensing the energy radiating off me. Mrs. Sutton, Sarah called out, looking relieved to see a familiar face. The readers aren't working. We can't get the elevators to move without a master override. I know, Sarah, I said, stopping at the turnstile. It is a security lockout. I reached into my bag and pulled out a distinct black keycard, not the standard white Aegis Wave badge, but the master admin card I had encoded for Sutton Cryptologic. I tapped it against the reader. The reader beeped a cheerful, solitary green. The turnstile unlocked with a heavy clunk. The crowd behind me gasped. They had been trying their badges for 2 hours with no luck. How did you do that? A junior developer asked, staring at me with wide eyes. I didn't answer. I pushed through the turnstile and walked toward the private executive elevator. I pressed the call button. It arrived instantly, as if it had been waiting for me. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the confused lobby, I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked calm. I looked ready. I pressed the button for the top floor. Colton, Sloan, and the board of directors were waiting in the conference room, likely trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. They thought they were waiting for a suspended employee to come and apologize. They were about to meet the landlord, when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. The hallway was quiet. The panic here was different. It was the silent, suffocating panic of people who know they are about to lose millions. I walked straight to the boardroom. The glass walls were frosted, but I could hear shouting from inside. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy door open. The room fell silent. Colton was at the head of the table, his head in his hands. Sloan was pacing, looking frantic. Evelyn Rhodes and the other board members were staring at their phones, watching the stock price plummet in pre-market trading, and sitting at the far end of the table, calm and composed, was Amara Blake. She had her laptop open and a stack of files arranged neatly in front of her. "You are late," Amara said, looking up at me with a small smirk. "Traffic was terrible," I replied. Walking over and taking the seat next to her, I placed my bag on the table. "Shall we begin the renegotiation?" The conference room on the 42nd floor was encased in glass, offering a panoramic view of Chicago buried under snow. It was a stark, beautiful backdrop for a massacre. On one side of the long, polished granite table sat the leadership of Aegis Wave Colton, looking disheveled and frantic. Sloane, whose perfectly applied makeup could not hide the tightness around her eyes. Evelyn Rhodes, the board chairwoman, looking like she had just swallowed a lemon, and the company's general counsel, a man named Marcus who was sweating through his expensive shirt. On the other side sat Amara Blake and me. We had no assistants. We had no stacks of panic-induced paperwork. We just had 2 open laptops and a single, thick white envelope that sat next to my hand. Unopened. Colton was the first to break the heavy silence. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing the water pitchers to rattle. "This is extortion," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You sabotaged the company. Peyton, you deliberately engineered a kill switch to hold us hostage. I will have you sued for everything you are worth. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage." I didn't blink. I didn't even look at him. I looked at the scrolling lines of code on my screen, monitoring the server status. "Actually," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I am just enforcing a contract. Amara." Amara slid a tablet across the table. It spun perfectly on the smooth granite and came to a stop directly in front of Marcus, the general counsel. "If you will look at the document titled Master Licensing Agreement between Sutton Cryptologic Holdings and Aegis Wave Dynamics," Amara said, her tone conversational. "Specifically Section 8, Paragraph C, Clause 4, Marcus picked up the tablet. His eyes scanned the legal text. His face went pale. "Read it out loud." "Marcus," Evelyn ordered sharply. Marcus cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly. "The licensor reserves the right to immediate, unilateral termination of all active licenses in the event that the primary inventor identified as Peyton Sutton is terminated without professional cause, or subjected to public defamation or humiliation by the executive leadership of the licensee." Colton froze. He stared at the tablet as if it were a venomous snake. "You signed that 3 years ago." "Colton," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "You were watching a football game. You said the legal details were boring. You said you trusted me." "That clause is unenforceable," Colton sputtered, looking at Marcus for backup. "It is personal vindictiveness disguised as business." "It is a binding contract," Amara corrected him. "And yesterday, you stood on a stage in front of 300 people and live-streamed yourself humiliating the primary inventor. You called her toxic. You suspended her without reviewing a single performance metric. You triggered the clause. Colton, you didn't just fire your wife, you fired your operating system." Evelyn Rhodes stood up. She walked over to the window, looked out at the city, and then turned back to face the room. She was a woman who managed billions of dollars in assets. She understood leverage better than anyone. "So," Evelyn said, her voice ice cold, "let me understand this. Unless we satisfy Peyton, the system stays down." "Correct," I said. "And if the system stays down," Evelyn continued, looking at Marcus, "what is our liability?" Marcus swallowed hard. "We have service-level agreements with 3 major banks and a hospital network. If we are offline for more than 24 hours, we are in breach of contract. The class action lawsuits would begin within the week. The damages would exceed our current cash reserves. We would be bankrupt in a month." The room went deadly silent. The reality of the situation settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't a marital spat. It was an extinction event. Evelyn walked back to the table and sat down. She ignored Colton completely. She looked directly at me. "Peyton," she said, her tone shifting from dismissive to respectful. "You didn't come here just to burn it down. If you wanted us dead, you would have stayed home. You are here because you want a deal. What are your terms?" I tapped a key on my laptop, projecting a document onto the main wall screen. "First," I said, pointing to the screen, "I require 51% of the voting rights in the subsidiary entity that manages the Helix Shield protocol. I will not allow my technology to be used for marketing stunts again." Colton started to protest, but Evelyn held up a hand to silence him. Second, I continued, I want a permanent seat on the board of directors of Aegis Wave, with absolute veto power over any decision involving technical security or product architecture. Reasonable, Evelyn muttered. Third, I said, turning my gaze to Sloane. She was sitting very still, gripping the armrests of her chair. Sloane Hart is to be immediately suspended from her position as Chief Brand Officer, pending a full internal investigation into her conduct. You can't do that, Sloane cried out, her voice shrill. I have a contract. And fourth, I finished, ignoring her. A public statement, issued by the board, correcting the record regarding the founding of this company. My role as co-founder and chief architect will be formally recognized in all company materials moving forward. Colton looked like he was about to explode. You want to take my company. You want to kick out the woman I love and castrate me on your way to the throne. I am saving the company, Colton, I said calmly. Something you stopped doing the moment you decided branding was more important than functionality. We can't accept these terms, Colton said, looking at Evelyn. She is bluffing. We can build a new system. We can't build anything if we are in prison, Colton. Amara interrupted. That stopped him cold. Amara reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second document. She didn't slide this one. She held it up. This, Amara announced, is a copy of a whistleblower complaint that was filed electronically with the Securities and Exchange Commission 2 hours ago. What? Sloane whispered. We have evidence, Amara continued. Logs, emails, and Slack messages proving that the data for the Mirage defense campaign was falsified. We have proof that you, Sloane, ordered the data team to smooth out the failure rates, and we have proof that you, Colton, presented those falsified numbers to this very board to trigger your performance bonuses. Evelyn turned slowly to look at Colton and Sloane. Her expression was no longer just cold. It was murderous. Is this true? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling with rage. Did you lie to the board about the adoption metrics? Colton opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at the floor. It was a projection. Sloane stammered. We were just anticipating the growth. It is standard marketing practice to... It is securities fraud, Amara snapped. And Peyton has provided the government with the server logs to prove it. She is the whistleblower. She is the only one in this room who is protected. The rest of you. You are looking at federal indictments unless you clean house immediately. The air in the room felt thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. Colton slumped in his chair, defeated. He realized finally that he wasn't fighting a jealous wife. He was fighting a superior intellect. But then, a strange sound broke the silence, a laugh. It was Sloane. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She didn't look terrified anymore. She looked venomous. You think you are so smart, don't you, Peyton? Sloane said, walking slowly toward the head of the table. You think you have all the cards? She turned to Evelyn. If you suspend me, Sloane said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. And if you let her dictate terms, I have some files of my own. Colton looked up, confused. Sloane, what are you doing? Shut up. Colton, she snapped. She looked back at Evelyn. I have emails from 3 years ago. From before the IPO, emails where Colton instructed the finance team to hide the burn rate in the marketing budget to inflate the valuation. I have kept them, just for insurance. Colton looked at her with pure horror. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had humiliated me for, was now holding a knife to his throat. If I go down, Sloane smiled, I take the golden boy with me, and the stock price goes to 0. So, here is my counteroffer. I stay, I get a raise, and we figure out a way to pay Peyton off without giving her control. The room was in chaos. Evelyn looked like she was calculating the blast radius of a nuclear bomb. Colton looked broken. Sloane looked triumphant. I sat there, watching them eat each other. It was pathetic. It was predictable. I reached out and placed my hand on the thick white envelope sitting on the table, the one I hadn't opened yet, the one Amara had prepared. They thought the whistleblower complaint was the kill shot. They thought the IP contract was the leverage. But they had forgotten the most personal piece of the puzzle. I tapped the envelope with my index finger. "You are all missing the point," I said softly. They stopped arguing. They turned to look at me, and at the envelope beneath my hand. "Sloan," I said, looking her in the eye, "your blackmail is cute. But it assumes that Colton is going to be the CEO tomorrow, and it assumes that I care about the stock price dropping." I picked up the envelope. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are all fighting over a burning house," I said, "but I am the only one holding the fire extinguisher, and I am not using it until I hand out one last document." I held the envelope out toward Colton. His eyes locked onto it. He knew, deep down, he knew what it was, but he had no idea that inside those papers was the final checkmate that would render Sloane's blackmail useless and his authority non-existent. "Open it," I commanded. "We need a 10-minute recess," Evelyn Rhodes announced, her voice tight with strain. "The board needs to confer with counsel." The room exhaled a collective breath of tension, but the war was far from over. I stayed in my seat, sipping water, while Amara checked her email. Across the room, I watched the predictable dance of desperation unfold. Sloane Hart did not waste a second. As soon as the break was called, she intercepted Evelyn near the coffee station. I could see Sloane's body language shift. The tears were gone. The arrogance was gone. In their place was the frantic, hushed intensity of a conspirator. She touched Evelyn's arm, leaning in close, speaking rapidly. I didn't need to hear the words to know exactly what she was offering. She was selling Colton out. She was telling Evelyn that if the board kept her on and marginalized me, she knew where the bodies were buried. She was promising to use her magic to scrub the falsified data before the investigators arrived, provided she was granted immunity. It was a classic prisoner's dilemma, and Sloane was defecting. "She is trying to cut a side deal," Amara whispered to me, not looking up from her screen. "I know," I replied, watching Sloane gesture emphatically. "She thinks she is the only one who knows how the data was cooked. She thinks that knowledge is her leverage." I reached for my phone and opened a message thread from Jenna Park. Jenna was an executive assistant in the marketing department, a quiet young woman whom Sloane treated like a personal servant, often making her fetch dry cleaning and walk her dog during office hours. Sloane thought Jenna was invisible. Sloane forgot that invisible people see everything. "Did you get it?" I typed. "Forwarded to your attorney now," Jenna replied. She bragged about it on the Inner Circle channel. She thought it was funny. I tapped Amara's arm. "Check your inbox. The final nail just arrived." When the 10 minutes were up, the board shuffled back to the table. Evelyn looked weary, her eyes darting between Sloane and Colton with newfound suspicion. Sloane returned to her seat with a confident smirk, seemingly believing she had planted enough doubt to save her own skin. "Before we discuss settlement terms," Evelyn began, "Sloane has raised some concerns about the feasibility of a transition without her specific knowledge of the data architecture." "I am sure she has," I said, cutting Evelyn off. "Sloane would have you believe that the fraud is complex and that she is the only one who can untangle it. She wants you to think she is the cure, not the disease." "I am just offering to help clean up the mess," Sloane interjected smoothly. "I know where the files are. I know how to interpret the discrepancies. If you fire me, good luck explaining the gap to the auditors." Amara didn't speak. She simply connected her laptop to the main display again. "If we could direct our attention to the screen," Amara said. The large monitor on the wall split into two distinct windows. On the left side was an email chain from Sloane to the data science team, dated 2 months prior. The subject line was, "Make it work." The text read, "I don't care if the adoption rate is only 12%. The investors want to see 20. Just add a multiplier to the projected users and label it Anticipated Engagement. Investors don't read the fine print. Ship it." On the right side of the screen was a screenshot of a private Slack conversation between Colton and Sloan from the night of the bank failure, the very night I had stayed up saving the system. Sloan: "The logs look bad. If the board sees the real latency, we lose the bonus." Colton: "Don't worry. If anything comes up, just say the technical team miscalculated the risk. We can blame Peyton's old architecture. Just make sure the dashboard looks green for the meeting." The room went absolute silent. It was the silence of a tomb. Colton stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He had been caught, in 4K resolution, conspiring to frame his wife and defraud his company. Sloane's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her leverage had just evaporated. She wasn't a wizard holding the keys. She was a documented fraudster. Evelyn Rhodes slowly turned her head. She looked at Colton, then at Sloan, with an expression of pure disgust. The realization hit her that keeping either of them was not just a risk, it was corporate suicide. Evelyn turned to me. Her demeanor changed completely. She was no longer negotiating with an enemy. She was pleading with a savior. "Peyton," Evelyn said, her voice steady but urgent, "if we agree to your terms, if we give you control of Helix Shield and the board seat, are you prepared to lead the self-reporting process? Can you guide us through the restructuring without destroying the company entirely?" I looked at the woman who had ignored me for 5 years. "I can," I said, "but my terms have been updated." "Name them," Evelyn said. "1," I said, counting off on my fingers. "Colton resigns as CEO effectively immediately. He transitions to a non-executive advisory role with no voting power, pending the results of the SEC investigation. He steps away from all daily operations." Colton made a noise in his throat, a strangled protest, but Marcus, the general counsel, put a hand on his shoulder to silence him. 2, I continued, "Sloan Hart is terminated for cause, effectively immediately. Her severance is 0. She is barred from the building and restricted from speaking to the press on behalf of Aegis Wave." Sloan gasped. "You can't do that. I built this brand." "You built a lie, Sloan," I said coldly, "and you are lucky I am only asking for your termination and not pressing for immediate criminal charges myself." "And 3, I finished, "the company formally joins me in the whistleblower complaint. We frame this as a correction initiated by the board and the founder to protect the shareholders. It is the only way to mitigate the fines." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Agreed. All of it. Agreed." "Wait." Colton stood up, his chair crashing backward. He looked frantic, his eyes wild. He looked at Evelyn, then at me. He realized the ground had vanished beneath him. He circled the table and walked toward me, disregarding the lawyers. He stopped 2 feet away, his hands held out in a pleading gesture. He decided to play the only card he had left us. "Peyton, please," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, soft register he used to use when he wanted me to work late. "Think about what you are doing. We built this, you and me. Remember the apartment in Milwaukee? Remember the pizza boxes? Remember how we promised we would take on the world together?" He reached out, trying to touch my arm. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean in. "I know I made mistakes," Colton pleaded, tears actually forming in his eyes. "I got lost in the lights, but we are a team. You can't just destroy me. You can't just strip me of my title and kick me to the curb. We are husband and wife, Peyton. Doesn't that mean anything?" The room watched, captivated. Sloan watched with hatred. Evelyn watched with pity. "It means everything," I said softly. Colton exhaled, looking relieved. He thought he had cracked me. He thought the dutiful wife was back. "That is why I prepared this," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick white envelope, the one I had carried out of the auditorium yesterday, the one I had placed on the table earlier but never opened. I slid it across the polished granite until it rested directly in front of his hands. "What is this?" Colton asked, his voice trembling. "Open it," I said. He picked it up. His fingers fumbled with the seal. He pulled out the stack of documents. The first page was not a business contract. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. The second page was a summons to appear, with a court date stamped in bold, black ink, January 14th, 900 hours. And the third document was a binding asset separation agreement, pre-calculated based on the post-nuptial agreement he had signed years ago. It showed that I was taking my 50% of the stock, my intellectual property, and my freedom. I wasn't asking for alimony. I wasn't asking for his penthouse. I was just taking what was mine. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning vents humming. Colton stared at the date. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he saw the truth. He saw that I hadn't come here to save our marriage. I had come here to end it with the same precision I used to write code. "You had this ready," he whispered. "You planned this." I calculated it. I corrected him. I stood up. Smoothing the front of my jacket, I looked over at Sloane, who was staring at the divorce papers with a look of absolute horror, realizing that the man she had stolen was now not only powerless, but also single and facing federal charges. I looked back at Colton. "You wanted to flaunt your mistress to the company," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the glass room. "You wanted a public spectacle. Well, I simply handed you the court date. That is your appointment. Colton, January 14th. I picked up my bag. "You have two choices now," I said, looking down at him. "You can cooperate with the board and me to save what is left of this company, and maybe stay out of prison, or you can stand there with Sloane and explain to the judge why you defrauded your investors." I turned to Evelyn. "I expect the paperwork for my appointment to be ready by noon. I will be in the server room unlocking the system." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the envelope sitting in the center of the table like a tombstone for a marriage that had died a long time ago. January 14th arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate, casting a gray, somber light over the Cook County Domestic Relations courtroom. The room was quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the server rooms or the shouting matches in the boardroom. The only sounds were the rustling of paper and the low hum of the heating vents. I sat on the left side of the heavy oak table, Amara next to me. On the right side sat Colton. He looked smaller than I remembered. The bespoke suits that used to fit him like armor now seemed to hang loosely on his frame. He wasn't fighting. There were no outbursts, no charming smiles, no attempts to gaslight the judge. He sat with his shoulders slumped, staring at the grain of the wood table. A man who finally understood that he had lost the war long before he realized the first shot had been fired. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, flipped through the thick file in front of her. She paused at the intellectual property addendum. The document that proved Sutton Cryptologic Holdings was the sole owner of the technology that powered Aegis Wave. "It appears the division of assets is quite specific regarding the technology rights," the judge said, looking over her glasses at Colton's lawyer. "Your client is not contesting the validity of the post-nuptial agreement regarding the holding company." "No, Your Honor," Colton's lawyer said quietly. "We are accepting the terms as written." Colton didn't look up. He knew he couldn't fight it. To fight the asset division would require him to prove he had a hand in writing the code. And thanks to the whistleblower complaint filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, admitting he didn't understand the underlying technology was the only thing keeping him from an immediate perjury charge. He had to accept that I was the architect to save himself from being labeled a fraud. We took a recess at 10:30 in the morning. I walked out into the marble hallway, the echo of my heels sounding sharp and decisive. I didn't go to the restroom to fix my makeup. I walked to the window overlooking the snowy street and checked my phone. It was ringing. Evelyn Rhodes. "Peyton," Evelyn's voice came through, crisp and efficient. "The emergency shareholder meeting just concluded." "And?" I asked, watching a snowplow clear the street below. "The vote was nearly unanimous," Evelyn said. 92% of the voting shares moved to remove Colton Sutton from his position as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. We have appointed an interim CEO from outside the industry, a specialist in crisis management and corporate restructuring. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. It wasn't relief. It was validation. And regarding my position, I asked, the board has formally approved the creation of a new role. Evelyn continued. Executive Chair of Technology, you will have complete oversight of the product roadmap, the security architecture, and the engineering teams. You will also have absolute veto power over any decision that compromises the integrity of Helix Shield or client security. You answer only to the board. Peyton, not to the CEO. Good, I said. And Sloan. Evelyn let out a short, dry laugh. Terminated for cause yesterday afternoon? Security escorted her out. She tried to take her laptop, but we confiscated it for the investigation. She is currently trying to spin a narrative on Twitter about being the victim of a jealous ex-wife and a patriarchal board. I had seen the posts. Sloan had written a long, rambling thread about how she was silenced by a woman who couldn't handle her husband's happiness. But the internet is a cruel place, and thanks to the public release of the whistleblower documents, the narrative had already shifted. The comments weren't supportive. They were mocking. Tech blogs were already running headlines like "The real founder of Aegis Wave stands up" and how one engineer took back her company. Sloan wasn't a victim. She was a punchline. Let her tweet, I told Evelyn. The more she talks, the more guilty she looks to the investigators. We will see you at the office at 2 o'clock, Evelyn said. The new CEO wants to meet the woman who holds the keys. I will be there, I said. I hung up and walked back into the courtroom. The final formalities were brief. The judge signed the decree, the marriage of 10 years. The partnership that had started in a cold apartment in Milwaukee with pizza boxes and big dreams was dissolved with the stroke of a pen. Colton picked up the pen to sign his copy of the agreement. His hand trembled slightly. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the nib hovering over the paper. Then, he signed. Amara gathered our documents, sliding them into her briefcase with a satisfying snap. Colton stood up slowly. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he shook his head. He turned to look at me. For the first time in months, his eyes were clear. The arrogance was gone. The defensive anger was gone. There was just a hollow, haunting sadness. Peyton, he said softly. I stopped, my hand on the back of my chair. Colton, he looked around the empty courtroom, then back at me. Do you ever regret it, any of it? I looked at him. I thought about the late nights coding while he slept. I thought about the way he looked at Sloan on that stage. I thought about the eraser he had taken to my name on the website. I only regret that I let you look down on me for too long. I answered. He flinched, as if I had slapped him. He nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it, and then turned away. He walked out of the courtroom alone, a man who had traded a diamond for a piece of glass and cut himself on the shards. I walked out of the double doors and down the wide stone steps of the courthouse. The air was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks, but it felt clean. At the bottom of the steps, a black car was waiting. Jenna Park, my former assistant who was now my chief of staff, was standing by the rear door, holding a thick binder of shareholder documents that needed my signature. Amara was right beside her, checking her watch. We have 40 minutes to get to the headquarters, Amara said as I approached. The press is already gathering in the lobby. They want a statement from the executive chair. I stopped on the sidewalk. The city moved around me, loud and chaotic and alive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the simple gold band I had worn for a decade. I looked at it for a moment. It felt light, insignificant. I dropped it into the side pocket of my coat. My phone buzzed in my other hand. It was an automated email notification from the server farm. System alert. New licensing agreement. Verified. Status active. Welcome back. Administrator. I smiled. A small, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Let's go, I said to Jenna and Amara. I climbed into the back of the car. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't look back at the past. I opened the binder, took out my pen, and prepared to write the first line of the new code. This time, no one would be able to delete my name from the history books. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Peyton's revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.